Hello guys, and welcome to my first attempt at a development log. I also suck at editing, so bear with me as we go through this. It's been a very long first month and I have a ton of content, so I'm going to space it out over a few videos over the next few weeks and hopefully catch up to where I am now. So first you may be asking, what is the actual plan? And here is the short-term plan. The first thing I'm doing is creating a landing page that anyone can go to and just get an idea of what the game is like, with what the art style is and how it feels, and also link to all my social media and have a way for people to subscribe for email updates for important dates such as the launch day. Then I'm going to shift focus to just getting gameplay stuff working with placeholder art. Just going to build it out, see how it feels, make sure it's fun, and also have a thing to show investors, publishers, or whoever is interested in the game if necessary. So that's the plan. And now we'll go on to our actual devlog updates. Alright, so clouds are going to be a super important part of the game because, as you'll find out later, weather is a very big part of this game. And I'm just going to be playing around with many different ways to do clouds and finding what works best for what I'm trying to do. So here we have just a simple 2D cloud texture that I've loaded. There's a bunch of things we need to do with it. First of all, it's transparent, and in order to handle transparency, you have to sort the triangles from back to front in the scene and render from back to front. Otherwise, with the way the depth buffer works, you're going to have things overlapping each other in weird ways. And there's many different ways of doing that, such as depth peeling. But for my purposes, with this type of cloud here, I just associate a depth value with each cloud and then just use simple insertion sort to sort the clouds. I'm not going to have that many clouds of this type in the scene. So that's how I'm doing it. Another thing you may notice is that there's a hard edge where the cloud meets the terrain, and that would be pretty ugly when there's a lot of clouds in the scene, so we want to get rid of that. And a way to get rid of that is by utilizing the depth buffer, also known as the Z buffer. And it sort of looks like this. It just has values that show the distance from the near plane of the camera's frustum to that point in the scene. And by comparing the cloud's depth with the depth of the terrain and the other objects, we can blend the cloud in to the scene when the cloud's depth is very close to the other objects in the scene. And then we get a result that looks like this. And I'm going to link an article in the description that goes into depth on how to do that. Another thing to point out is that the depth buffer's precision drops off pretty dramatically as the distance from the camera increases, and that's because depth values are stored non-linearly. And I'll link to another article that describes that in detail, and also describes some ways of improving that. There's just different ways that you can store your depth values that will improve that. I'm going to stick to the default that OpenGL has for now, and if there's issues in the future, I'll change that up because my view distance is not going to be that big, so we'll see. Also, I'm trying to have things like clouds be procedurally generated, so I want to try to generate the textures using noise. And a way that I thought of to do this for the clouds that would be kind of efficient is to generate just a fixed giant noise texture that all the clouds will just sample parts of and scroll along in different ways and make it seem like it's procedurally generated, but it'll sort of just be that fixed texture that it's scrolling along. And after some tweaks in the shaders, I ended up with a result that looks like this, which I'm pretty satisfied with so far. And I'll probably change the scroll direction depending on the wind velocity at that point, etc. We'll see, but looking pretty good so far. And the next part of the video will be focused on some color related things that I ended up getting into. First, I ended up going into Photoshop and creating a bunch of new textures for the terrain using just some custom brushes that I made. Very simple stuff that you can see. And then I went ahead and learned how gamma correction and HDR works. First, I'll go into gamma correction, and I won't go too in depth. I'll just link to articles below because this is more of a devlog, not a tutorial. Basically, monitors display images that are gamma corrected, which is a non-linear color space. It's called sRGB. And what we want to do is, when we work with assets, we want to work in a linear space to do things like lighting in the game. And so what we do is we take an image or whatever we're trying to load and first load it in the linear space, ungamma corrected, and then do our lighting calculations. And when we're all done and ready to render the scene, we do a manual gamma correction on top of that before we render it. And doing the gamma correction is pretty simple. You just do a little exponent like this, and your scene goes from looking like this in linear space to this in non-linear gamma corrected space. Now, if you've never heard of this stuff, that probably didn't make any sense, so I just wanted this to be a starting point for your research. So just click on the links, Google things, and read up all about it. The next thing I'm going to go into is my attempt at HDR. Now, the definition of HDR that I'm talking about is the idea of taking a high range of output values and mapping that into a low range, which is from 0 to 1, so that it can be displayed on all monitors. So if you have a scene with a lot of lights that stack on top of each other, you want to be able to have a much bigger range than 0 to 1 of output values, so that you can represent all the different shades properly. And then you do something called tone mapping to map that back into the low range from 0 to 1, and hopefully get it to look nice. There's a few different ways, or many different ways to do tone mapping, and you can Google them all. I think the most popular one is called ACES. So I went ahead and did all that, and my conclusion for now, this will probably change in the future, who knows, is to just keep my calculations all in the 0 to 1 range, because it feels like I have more control over things. I played around with some tone mapping functions, and overall it felt like it made things harder to control. So, and my game is probably not going to have like that many lights in a single scene to really benefit from this, but again, this may change, we'll see. Alright, so I'm going to keep this video short. I want to try to make my devlogs in tiny little chunks so it's easy to get through them without having to skip through them. If you want more in-depth tutorials on anything that I've talked about, just let me know in the comments and I can create a dedicated one. Other than that, see you later.